Hi, everyone. Welcome back to a special edition of our podcast. On Easter Day, we're going to be talking about an update on what's going on in the world with tariffs. We did an episode already about
Yeah,
explaining what they are and everything like that. Today, we're just going to dig right.
yeah,
So,
yeah. We
yeah,
are we are here again. Actually, it's a very hot topic. I'm sure we'll be talking about this during the whole year, even more years.
yeah. Like, what is going on? Have tariffs hitting every single country, Spain included, being impacted. 10% universal tariff. Trump is just going at it with almost every single country. It's impacting everyone across the world, impacting the stock market, bond market, financial markets, and we're here to talk about it all. So stay with us for the first part where we're just going to talk about what what tariffs were put in place. Carlos, you want to discuss a little bit about the percentages, what countries were impacted specifically, and everything like that?
Yeah, yeah. So now we know more about the tariffs that Donald Trump has imposed on other countries. We know that he's trying to implement his protectionist strategy about mainly. So the main tariff is the 10% on all imports. That's the universal tariffs strategy. Apart from this percentage, he imposed um, like some tariffs which hit more harder than other countries, like China,
Mm.
more specifically, and Vietnam and Bangladesh. The maybe the most interesting part here is the China. China is the main competitor of US here. Like uh, speaking about the tariffs, you see how China is responding on against this approach from US.
Yeah.
But also we have a lot of tariffs against even allies, like in my case, in the European Union, with a 20% tariffs percentage, Japan, Canada, and Mexico. During these months, we'll see a lot of negotiations with the US. We'll see finally this uh, turn out.
Yeah. It's just like he didn't discriminate in the tariffs that he imposed. Like you mentioned, he put it on everyone.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah,
China
actually,
hit the hardest. What, over 100% tariff on China?
yeah, that's crazy.
Vietnam, Bangladesh, the countries that in specific most like we import in the United States. The United States imports the most from China, Vietnam,
Hmm.
Bangladesh, and they put the biggest tariffs on those countries. I think it goes back to his campaign promises of bringing back factories and those blue collar jobs back to the United States. Yeah, and even
Mm,
the European Union
yeah,
often
even the
says
European
that.
Union.
Yeah, he often says that like the European Union was created to kind of screw the United States on. He imposed a lot of the tariffs on the European Union for that reason to kind of get revenge on from past years, even if it's not correct,
Yeah,
whether it's correct or not. That's what he did.
yeah, he's trying to take the advantage as much as possible. But actually, yeah, here I have some doubts about this because we've seen how this year Donald Trump was able to reach the power, but actually, like 4 years ago, when he went to the power, actually he was not able to impose all these tariffs. Do you know why is the reason there in US?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Something that like he said he was going to do it in his second term. But a lot of them, I feel like a lot of people didn't know the extent that he was going to put tariffs on other countries and really disrupt the global order as much as he
Yeah,
did. In his first term, he has always, ever since he was a young man, before he even entered politics, he always talked about how the US gets ripped off, how it should be more fair and balanced. And if he were president, the US would make a lot of money. But in his first term, I don't think he had the ability to do it just because when he won the election, he didn't win in the way he won his second term. His first term, he won the electoral college, which is the mechanism to win the presidency here. You have to win a certain amount of points
Okay.
given to states to win, but he didn't win the popular vote. He was all, like, he didn't have the mandate that he had this time around. He didn't know the people. He didn't have the he didn't know, he was new to the job. But now this time around, when he won the election, he won all the swing states, are states that could have either went for the other candidate, Kamala Harris, or himself. He won all 7 or 8 of them. He won the popular vote. There's a Republican majority in the Congress, which is the House of Representatives and the Senate, and as well as the Supreme Court is leans Republican. So he has, in his words, all of the cards to impose basically what he envisions the new global order to be, which is what he says tariffs or trade as opposed to free trade and stuff like that. So I think this is just a culmination of everything that has talked about in the
Yeah.
past coming together, and taking the world by surprise.
Okay. Yeah. I see. And now he has the necessary support that a lot of people, even people who has voted him, losing a lot of profitability from bonds,
Mhm.
foreign kind of investments, even inflation. Maybe the inflation didn't have
Mhm.
a direct impact, but maybe yes in the future. But above all the bonds market, the these kind of measures impact directly on this.
Yeah, we could talk a little bit about the bonds market. I think right before we mention that, I just want to make it clear that like the tariffs, he put over 100% tariff on China, Vietnam like 50%, Bangladesh around 40%, the largest countries that export to the US, as well as allies. But there was also some exemptions. So there was some exemptions on semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, critical minerals, which we'll talk about in a little bit, the rare earth materials, as well as some legal exemptions. There's a 10% blanket on all countries. There's more tariffs specifically on countries that export the most to the US to bring back manufacturing. And then there's exemptions for things that the US depends on a lot. So semiconductors for phones and gadgets, pharmaceuticals, which most of it are in China and other countries. If the US were not to put exemptions on those products, it would completely disrupt the so yeah, and in retaliation, like China had hit back the hardest with 125% tariffs. Vietnam took a more strategic, as well as like India, South Korea, Japan. Um, and when they did this, the U.S. had to think how they would respond. I think what put the administration off the most is now there's a 90-day pause on tariffs
Yeah,
to all
exactly.
countries, but pretty much China. They kept the 10% universal. I think there's a 90-day pause on the rest of the tariffs. And what scared, as you mentioned, what really brought fear into the administration is the bond market. Think it's the bond market is the heartbeat of the global finance, because the
Hmm?
bond market is essentially there's a yield on bonds when you buy government bonds. They loan money to you through interest when you buy the bonds, but also when the interest rate goes up, it's a lot harder um, to buy loans. So you can't buy cars, you can't buy mortgages, credit card loans go up. When he put the tariffs on, it brought fear that the tariffs would bring higher prices with inflation, which is the
Mm,
number one enemy for for bonds, because it eats away at future returns, as well as investors started selling treasuries. So when you sell treasuries, the price goes down, but the yield, the percent to borrow goes up. And when that happened, the 10-year and that really brought a lot of fear into the administration. I'm curious in Spain, how did that plan out? There in the market a lot of fear, a lot of people pulling away.
yeah, actually, yeah, there's a lot of fear here, but at the end, it's not specifically here in Spain because we take part of the European Union. So yeah, we go together with the European Union, but yeah, the European Union is scared about this, and that's why they are negotiating with Trump, and they're taking uh, even they respond with some tariffs of whiskey, bikes, car industry. So yeah, as we told in the first episode, the European Union has the power to respond. Actually, they are doing it.
Interesting. And
Yeah,
a lot of sentiment here is a lot of Americans, I don't think, agree too much with. They agree with that there should be more fair trade, like more equal reciprocal tariff, but they don't
yeah,
necessarily agree with the approach he's taking. I think.
I see.
Is there a lot of support in Spain and the European Union to fight back against the United States and the tariffs, or is it more so like let's just find a deal and get it over with?
I think the main goal is to redress the balance they
Mhm.
got. That's why the most important thing now is to negotiate with US and try to get the best offer as possible. So let's see what happens during these months of negotiation. Before I said that this kind of tariffs affect the citizens related to the bonds, but also a lot
Mm.
of entrepreneurs were
Oh
affected
yeah.
by this. A lot of companies, big companies, big technology companies in US.
Yeah, I agree. The treasury is, like we said, the heartbeat of the market. If it's disrupted, that's when people really start to consider there's problems in the economy. Um,
Yeah,
more so than bonds, or not bonds, stocks. More so than stocks, because stocks could fluctuate, stocks could go up and down. But once there's an impact on the bond market, that's when investors and economists and so forth have to really take a closer look and say, like, what are we doing here?
yeah,
Yeah, and another part that we want to talk about is rare earths, earth materials in particular, because there was an exemption on tariffs on some rare earth materials because the US is so heavily dependent on them for
yeah,
things
exactly.
like semiconductors, electronics. I mean, these are crucial for everything. I think Apple's stock, the company Apple, their stock was hit very hard because of the tariffs originally, and it kind of went up a little bit after the 90-day pause and the exemptions on those materials. But do you want to talk about like what happened here? Is there any solution that the U.S. has to kind of go bypass China to get some
Yeah,
rare
at the
earths?
end here, the US depend on China at least in a say 60-70% of the imports. So that's a really high percent. That's why US is trying to find another resources over other countries, like for example Ukraine. Not time ago, Donald Trump was trying to negotiate with Zelensky, also in another countries like I think Bangladesh. So that way, US can depend less from China, and this way can impose these tariffs.
Yeah, it's crazy that the U.S. depends so heavily on China.
Yeah,
It's
a
also a
lot.
good thing. It's also a good thing for Ukraine, right? Because not only does the U.S. depend on China, but also the European Union depends on China for a lot of the rare earth materials. And Ukraine, in particular, being in a war with Russia right now, they need as much leverage as they can get, and having rare earth is just vital for them strategically. They could ask for more protection from the European Union and the United States for them to receive or to give them rare earths. So you see
Yeah,
President Zelensky in the US, he's trying to get a deal. Well, Trump has a deal. The Trump administration has a deal in place for rare earth mining to send it back to the US in exchange for protection, US
yeah, exactly.
protection and protection.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Yeah, yeah, I think we told uh, uh, about lots of facts about this topic. And do you want to the
Yeah,
tariffs?
yeah, we could close out by next steps, or what do we think is going to happen. Personally,
Yeah,
I think there's going to be trade deals made with almost every country or every trading partner. I think China will be the last of the countries to have a trade deal, but
Yeah,
ultimately,
for
I
sure.
because there's so much that goes into it, in my opinion.
Yeah,
Um, but I think the European Union and allies, I think, will be more quicker to have a
yeah,
trade deal reached. But yeah, China will be one of the last ones, in my opinion. But ultimately, I see a world less globalistic, and for at least the short term, countries will I think it'll be less efficient because countries will now not only be thinking about what makes the most sense economically, but also what makes the most sense with national security. So the US, even if it costs less to produce things in China, for example, pharmaceutical products, they're going to now produce them in the US just because pharmaceutical products are so crucial. And if we're in war with China, for example, the last thing we want is to not receive medicine. So I think this is a change in the global order. And for at least the short term, a lot of the countries will give up some efficiency for national security within their country. But I think it'll be resolved. Economic trade um, things will be resolved within Trump's presidency.
yeah. So yeah, for sure, we commenting when once the negotiations end up during next month. So we'll see on next episode about the tariffs, and let's see the the outcomes.
Yeah. Well, I think this is really cool. We'll see you at the next episode.
Yeah. See
Bye,
ya.
Carlos. See ya.